Hi, and thank you for joining our webinar series, Navigating Business in 2021. I'm your host, Don Steyer, and I really look forward to today's discussion, the art of coalescing people around the big idea. It's something that's very near and dear to my heart because it took me years personally to really learn how to communicate new ideas in the world of innovation and technology. And I sure wish I would have had some of these pointers that we're going to hear today. Before we get started, WBB is excited to now be part of the Circle family, so you may hear us refer to both throughout the conversation. Also, when you join GoToMeeting, your mic is automatically muted and your video is not shared, so we can't see or hear you. Because of that, we have a Q&A feature. So for any questions or thoughts that you want to share, please use the Q&A feature on the screen. You can submit the questions throughout the presentation. If we don't get to your question live, we'll send you a message following the webinar. We'll also send you notes from today's presentation, including any resources we reference. I would really like to introduce Tim Wyan, who's an expert in leadership, culture, and high-performing teams. He has a wealth of experience motivating and inspiring others to achieve high performance. Tim is a retired United States Naval, or I'm sorry, I messed that up. Good grief. A United States Marine Corps officer and a U.S. Naval Academy graduate. Tim, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. And please talk to us about the art of coalescing people around the big idea.
Well, thank you, Don, and I'm certainly extremely excited to be virtually connected with all of you here today. Let's go ahead and lead with a definition. And the definition I want to lead with, not surprisingly, is coalesce. Coalesce is a word that means to grow together, to unite a whole, to unite for a common end, to arise from the combination of distinct elements. And certainly the title of this webinar makes this really important definition to understand up front because it underpins the whole presentation today. I've always wanted to make this presentation more about practice and less about theory. So I want to tell a story. And this is a story from real life. This is actually a story from my life. So let's go to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Many of you will know that it's one of several homes of operational Marine Corps units. It's October 2007. So I had just taken command of a very large Marine Corps infantry organization. And I knew that all eyes, both inside and outside of the command, were squarely on me. You know, by that point, I'd been in the Marine Corps for about 17 plus years. And I certainly knew at that point of my life in uniform, I knew what right looked like. But I have to tell you, as I made my way around the command in those early days, I very quickly started to dislike what I was seeing. You know, I sensed that I had a unit that had some major issues. I even went so far to say that that unit was rotten to its core, and it troubled me greatly. You know, as I made my way around the unit, I noticed that Marines treated each other very poorly. In the months before I took command, Marines were dying. And they were dying from suicides, they were dying from drownings, and they were dying from some very tragic training accidents that could have been prevented through the employment of established safety practices. The older Marines in the units, they hazed the younger Marines. They inflicted both physical and emotional harm on young Marines in the unit. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service was crawling all over the battalion. And I have to say, this was supposed to be the pinnacle of my career to date. And I have to tell you, at that point, it was anything but. I knew full well that if I didn't do something about the state of the battalion, no one would. There would be no change. Only I could begin to define the organization as I wanted it to be. So I acted. I put myself into motion. To confront the rot that I was observing throughout the unit, the first thing I did was develop my big idea. I personally wrote the oath of the 1st Battalion, 2nd Marine Regiment. Now, infantry battalions in the Marine Corps are referred to by their numbers. So 1st Battalion, 2nd Marine Regiment was called 1-2. And I called the oath, not surprisingly, the 1-2 oath. And the oath started with these words, and you can also see those on the slide. I am a proud member of 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines. It is my battalion. The other members of this battalion, both officer and enlisted, are my family. I value them and will take care of them just as I would my own family. They will do the same for me. I don't even have to ask. And the oath goes on from there. To me, this passage, the initial passage of the oath, and the rest of the oath that followed, all of which fit on one page of paper. This was about a mental approach to existing in the unit. Basically, how do we think of ourselves as members of the 1st Battalion, 2nd Marine Regiment? The mental approach that I wanted people to adopt in this particular case, it was my vision. And I pursued the understanding and the acceptance of this vision with everything that I had. First thing I did, I circled up 800 plus Marines and sailors in a large formation. I stood in the center of the formation and they were circled all around me. Like an oath of office, I made them raise their right hands and repeat after me. I read every single word of the oath to them, one by one. The Marines and the sailors of the unit, they read every single word of the oath back to me, one by one. Later, as I continued to make my way around the command, try to insert my influence, I talked about the content and the meaning of the oath again and again and again. And I did it again in big groups, and I did it in small groups. And frankly, I did it in any size group, anywhere, anytime. I did my very best to model the behavior that I was seeking in the words of the oath. And when individual Marines made mistakes, I put the oath, the very piece of paper that the words of the oath were written on, I put that right in front of them. And I asked them, read the oath again. Tell me, where have you missed the mark? Where has your conduct, your behavior missed the mark of the oath? I did this in front of the commanders that worked for me because I wanted them to do the same things with their Marines in places where I wasn't. I quickly learned that coalescing, the action of coalescing people around the big idea, team sport. In practice, it took months for the oath to take hold in the battalion. And I recall people earlier in my career, prior to taking command, telling me that big ideas, they don't take hold overnight. Most people in the battalion followed my lead. Some resisted. I eventually brought some of those resistors around. I convinced them of the value of the words of the oath. Others refused to comply and never complied. And frankly, I just moved on without them. A small group continued to resist me so much. Maybe they were stuck in their old ways, but I had to take the bold step of ushering them out of the Marine Corps. And I had good reason to do so. You know, with help, I was able to convince many Marines and sailors down to the lowest levels of the organization of the value of my big idea. And soon they told two friends, and you know how it goes from here. They told two friends, and so on, and so on, and so on. As I tried to assess progress, you know, how well the oath was taking hold in the unit, very important step for me. I recall standing in a forward operating base west of Fallujah in Iraq, many months after that hand-raising event that I talked about. I had a Marine Corps corporal walk up to me with a big smile on his face. He recited the oath, word for word, top to bottom, perfectly. The smile on his face told me something because he smiled the entire time he was reciting it, but so did his commitment to learn the very important words of our oath. It's one of the most amazing sights I had ever seen. I still think about it to this day. I got to tell you though, the process of coalescing people around my big idea, the words of that oath, it was a very rough process. It tested me in ways that I had never been tested before. Remember I told you it took months for the oath to take hold in the unit? Well, at one point, somewhat early in my tenure as a commander, before anything resembling success had been achieved, I stood tall in front of a two-star general in the Marine Corps in his office. While I was waiting in the hallway to go into the office, his sergeant major was talking on the phone to somebody, don't know who it was. He was talking about my unit. He was talking about 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines. And the words that he was using on the phone were not glowing. He didn't know I was standing there. That event was a dagger to my heart and remains one of the worst events of my Marine Corps career. When I finally got into the Major General's office, he wanted to know what the hell was going on in my organization. And I have to say, 17 plus years into the Marine Corps, that was new territory for me. I've never had anybody ask me that question. And it wasn't a very pleasant experience. The general didn't know it, of course, but I was already in motion, and I had been in motion for months. I held my own in that meeting, still proud of that to this day. I showed courage, and I told the general everything that I was doing, everything that we were doing to coalesce people around the big idea, the 1-2 oath. And I was fortunate to leave his office still in command. And that was not something I was completely convinced was a foregone conclusion when I had entered an hour earlier. So fast forward, February 2009, we had returned from deployment, and frankly, my unit had performed superbly. A separate Marine Corps general, not the one I talked about in the last minute, he told someone who later told me that 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines was the best unit that he'd observed in Iraq during his tour at Multinational Forces West. I was and am, as I speak right now, extremely proud of that. I was even prouder to bring everyone home. No deaths while deployed, no deaths while on post-deployment leave. When the new Marines showed up to the unit and the Marines from Iraq returned home, they didn't haze them, which is a very uncommon occurrence. Normally, that happens. Beyond just the corporal at the forward operating base, we had succeeded, it appeared, in getting the big idea, those words of the oath, to take hold across the battalion. And just how did we get people to believe in that big idea? As I said, I like to talk practically about it, and I hope to provide you the answer to that question before I'm done here today. So you might be asking yourself, well, what's a big idea? Well, there's a list on the slide that you can see, but I certainly don't offer that as the definitive list. There are no doubt other manifestations of the big idea beyond just what you see on the slide. I do feel very strongly, and with all due respect, that you don't have to operate in and around the C-suite or at the very top of an organization to have a monopoly on big ideas. And hopefully that should not be an objectionable to anyone on this webinar. And frankly, this webinar series is a prime example of that. In reality, anybody can have a big idea. Anyone listening to my voice right now can have a big idea. The problem is some just may not have the sway. They may not have the access to people, the right people, to make that big idea take hold widely. As you probably guessed from my story, today's focus is on those two bottom bullets, vision and mental approach. And while I firmly believe that big ideas can come from anywhere in an organization, these two manifestations of the big idea are usually initiated from the top. First, vision, perhaps thought of as a desired optimal future state of an organization, and leaders conceive this desired state and they act very deliberately to bring it about. The other one is mental approach, and for me it's simply, as I think I implied earlier, it's the way that we want people in our organization to behave, to speak, to think, to act, to interact, and to collaborate. Mental approach describes how we want people to view their very own organization, that organization to which they belong, how we want them to view each other, and quite frankly, how we want them to exist as members of the team. Why do big ideas like vision and mental approach matter? Well, the main thing I learned from the experiences captured in that story is that vision and mental approach as big ideas matter, and they matter an awful lot. They do all the things you see on the slide, and they do a lot more as well. Vision and mental approach as big ideas, they strengthen a leader's effectiveness. I know they strengthened mine. They inspire individual action, and they go so far as to create a bias for action among people in the organization. They actually give the individual actions of various people in the organization a purpose. Vision and mental approach as big ideas, they unite people, and they unite them by offering a common way of seeing and doing things. In all of these ways, vision and mental approach underpin an organization's culture. Vision and mental approach define the organization and the organization's culture the way the leader wants it to be defined. Vision and mental approach focus the daily discussion not so much on the task, what we do on a daily basis, but on the purpose, why we do it. Focus on purpose results in one thing that was always very near and dear to me, and that's unity of purpose. And every organization, military or otherwise, benefits from unity of purpose. So how do you define leadership? My experiences in command helped me to come to grips with what I think leadership is all about. And on the slide, you can see my definition. And I've refined this definition over many, many years. And I've taken the opportunity to emphasize in red font those words, in my opinion, that I think matter the most. First, this definition has verbs. Everybody knows that verbs equal action. They are things that must be done, actions that must be taken, and they got to be done and taken by leaders. Also note that in my world, leadership absolutely includes the development and articulation of the big idea. This idea of the big idea is a central part of my definition of leadership. We develop the vision and the mental approach for a reason, to achieve things in the real world. We want to make the organization better overall, and our vision and mental approach is aimed at doing that. The definition you can see on the slide makes sure that I never forget that leadership has a purpose. Leadership is meant to achieve things in the real world. Don't ever get to the point where you just say that leadership simply is something. It is much more accurate, and I think completely appropriate, to say that leadership does something. Borrowing from some very learned people, note in my definition of leadership that it seeks to create that vision and mental approach twice. It creates it once in the mind of its originator, the leader, and then it creates it again in the minds of the people who must carry it out. This definition also reminds me that we can never do truly meaningful things by ourselves. So let's look at the four main actions related to coalescing people around the big idea. Not surprisingly, all verbs, all things we must do as leaders or the owner of the big idea to be successful. The first verb, develop. In practice, we must develop our vision and our mental approach. And frankly, developing the vision and mental approach cannot be effectively outsourced to someone else. When we seek to develop our vision and mental approach, our big idea, we should do a few things first, and we should do them very, very well. First, before we commit a single word to paper, observe what's going on around us. We will need to move around quite a bit to do that. Next, just listen. We need to actively listen to what people are saying about what is going on around us. After that, we reflect. We reflect on both what we're seeing and what we're hearing. And then and only then, after we've done all those things, can we attempt to write the vision or the mental approach, to articulate that big idea. We may have others help us in actually writing it, but remember, ultimately, the words must be ours. And when we're done writing it, we need to refine it. And then refine it again, and then refine it again. Remember, we said leadership seeks to create that vision and mental approach twice. Well, development of that vision and mental approach, this first verb, that's where we seek to create that vision and mental approach, that big idea in our own minds for the first time. I think you'll agree with me, if we can't come to grips with it in our own head, probably not going to be too much hope for success in the very important actions to follow. The next action, another verb, communicate. This is another action required by us as leaders or the owners of the big idea. Communication is where we seek to create that vision and mental approach for the second time in the minds of the people who are vital to us in carrying it out, in helping it to take hold. Communication works best when we can connect with those who will hear our words. This is where the aforementioned human endeavor aspect of leadership, as I defined it on the previous slide, comes into play. So first, seek ways to connect. Seek ways to connect with other people. Some ways are better than others, I think. For the type of communication I'm talking about, in person, those in the physical presence of connections, man, those are the best, right? We've all proven to ourselves over the last 15 or so months that virtual connections can also work. Purely written connections, when you're trying to get people to coalesce around the big idea, those are nice. It's a good place to start, but they're not going to be all that effective by themselves. So in reality, some combination of all of these different ways to connect with other human beings is probably where we find success, but you'll have to think it through. Communicating our vision and mental approach is never a one-time thing. Let people see and hear our words again and again and again. Remember, I told you earlier that we can never do anything truly meaningful alone. So in order to be the most effective, we've got to go out and gather many voices. They can help us say, as I mentioned earlier, what we want to say in those places where we can't be present to say it. The next action, that very important word we defined up front, coalesce. Remember that definition? To grow together, to unite into a whole, to unite for a common end, to arise from the combination of distinct elements. Coalesce is yet another verb, another action required by us as leaders or owners of the big idea. This is the hard part, as just writing and speaking the vision and mental approach means absolutely nothing. This action, the action of coalescing people around the big idea, I'd ask you to consider it as equal parts skill and will. The skill part is the ability to unite people. The will part, the inclination, the appetite, the passion to actually go out and do it. The human connection is and always will be, in my mind, the foundation for anyone's success in coalescing. In practice, those connections between human beings that I talked about, they come in lots of different forms: ideological, social, personal, professional, even spiritual. One thing I learned, if we have no meaningful connections with people in our organizations, good luck getting them to care about our vision and our mental approach, our big ideas, as much as we do. Detached people simply cannot coalesce others around anything. We should love our vision and mental approach. After all, it emerged from a deliberate process of observation, listening, contemplation, writing, and refinement. While we want it to be theirs when it's all said and done, remember it started as ours. If we don't love it, if we don't love our own vision, our own mental approach, our own big idea, who will? We should also live our vision and mental approach, model the behavior we hope to take hold in our organization. And I'm pretty sure most folks on this call know the power of example. Lastly, in this fight for supremacy, in this battle royal between what and why, what matters, but why dominates every single time. So communicate the why behind all of this. Remember that 1-2 oath I talked about? Sure you do. There's a line in it that says, I must build trust now, for combat awaits me. And my brothers must have trust in me on the field of battle, or we will fail. I told you I wrote those words myself. And back in Camp Lejeune in 2007, 2008, and 2009, that was my why. And I needed to work very, very hard to make sure it was everyone's why as well. And the last action is assess, another verb, another action required by us as leaders or owners of the big idea. I've always said nothing meaningful is worth doing if we aren't going to assess how well we're doing it. This is the measurement of what is actually happening in the real world compared to what we intended to have happen in the real world. If vision is the pursuit of the desired future state, assessment is the comparison between the current state, what's happening, and that desired future state that we want. You know, if things are going perfectly, these two things are the same. In most cases, they are not. So our job is to figure out what is different between the current state and the desired future state, and more importantly, why? Why are they different? So we put ourselves in positions where we can see if our vision and mental approach, our big ideas have taken hold. We get out, we try to monitor things for ourselves. We need to be where the action is frequently to take it all in. To do assessment correctly, we will need help. So we should create a big tent of contributors throughout the organization to help us understand that delta between the current state, what's happening now, and that desired future state that we want. We shouldn't fall in love with our original approach. Please don't do that. We should adjust if needed and show the courage to make a change. If adjustments need to be made, we should communicate them clearly and often and do so to a wide audience. As I mentioned in my story, roadblocks to coalescing people around our vision and mental approach, very, very real. We should always expect some resistance in the implementation of big ideas. Confront them head on. Sometimes the roadblocks to big idea implementation are people who oppose the approach because they just don't like the idea or frankly just don't understand it. Others may like the idea but just don't have the will to make it happen, the will to change. If someone doesn't like or understand the big idea, we can bridge, another verb. We can try to bridge the gap by working feverishly to understand their why, their perspective, and help them to better understand ours. Here, those aforementioned human connections that I keep beating the drum on, those are really important and can certainly help the cause. Are you always going to be effective at bridging the gap and understanding? Absolutely not. The best you may do, the best we may do with some people is simply to prevent them from actually working against us, against our big ideas, even if they aren't all that excited about working with us. Acknowledging the resistance, and hopefully it's mild, we should trust in our vision and mental approach and the why behind it. When roadblocks appear, we should not lose faith in the value of our approach. We worked extremely hard to develop the way forward, so stay the course and remain resilient. We may make a few minor adjustments along the way, as I mentioned, which is just a smart move if the conditions demand it, but stay the course. As we near the end, some final thoughts. As I said, with all due respect to very important and influential people, big ideas are not solely the province of the C-suite or the top level of any organization. You know, anyone can have a big idea, as I've defined it here today. The hardest part, as I mentioned before, is to get that big idea to take hold, to get to the point where other people care about our big ideas just as much as we do. And I predict many, if not most, will need help. So those leaders and influential people in an organization can play a really important role, the role of big idea enabler. Listen to what people are saying. People with big ideas need allies, so support the identification and formulation of the big ideas. And if a big idea has merit, help it to take hold. Act on the very important role that many play as influential people in the organization to cultivate those big ideas from within. I'd certainly be remiss if I didn't say this clearly. You know, my specific story doesn't need to be your story. I know those of you listening to me right now, you're not commanding infantry battalions in the Marine Corps. Maybe you did at one point, but that's not really the point. You know, when we consider the application to us in the corporate setting, perhaps the lesson is actually very simple. If we have a big idea, maybe that big idea is in contracts, in finance, in program management, in proposals, in business development, in HR, in anything, we should do something about it. We should figure out what our big idea is. We should develop it. We should talk about it. We should communicate it. And above all else, we should show the courage to try to make people care about our big idea or ideas as much as we do. And remembering the value of will and skill, we should work actively to coalesce people around that big idea. Like leadership itself, big ideas are meant to achieve things, to drive change that makes things better. In fact, big ideas are the catalyst for change, but real change only comes from people with the courage to formulate and sell the big ideas and then stay the course. You know, if we believe in our big ideas as much as we should, we must find our way around those inevitable roadblocks. I see big ideas and the courage to pursue them as two key foundations for organizational growth, two contributors to that better, brighter future state that we all hope for. I hope my story proves that. And for my money, and I hope for yours as well, I think a better, brighter future state is a really big idea that we can all get behind. I want to thank you for your time today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Tim, that was incredibly powerful, and really thank you so much. And I'm going to get to questions really, really quick because we're really at the end of our time here. But the last two topics that we covered were things like artificial intelligence, digital transformation, and these are providing many opportunities, as you would say, to generate big ideas. But many of them come from grassroots movement, or what we would say in the Navy, from the deck plate. What advice, if you could, would you give to people on how to communicate the value and vision from the grassroots to leadership, such that they can adopt and drive those ideas from the top down?
Thank you for the question, Don, and it's a great question. I want to use something that I heard yesterday from a very, very senior person in our company. And he said quite simply and rather quickly, but rather importantly, it's still all about the people. Right, right. I think people who have the big ideas, it's still the people that have the big ideas. And when you look at those 4 verbs I talked about, you know, develop, communicate, coalesce, and assess, I mean, it's people that do that, right? So it doesn't really matter to me whether we're in the digital age or the ice age or the information age or even the stone age for that matter. You know, the value of people in the game of big ideas hasn't changed. It's still, they are still as important as ever. People still have the responsibility to develop the big ideas, impress upon others the value of those. And then others have the responsibility, other people, to know a good idea when they hear it and facilitate its implementation. There may be a school of thought out there that writes people out of this sort of thing down the road, right? I'm not there yet. And frankly, I'll tell you, I'm likely never to get there. So the theme of this presentation has been about people, right? It's about people. And frankly, I don't care what age we're in. I don't think that changes.
Oh, no, that's a great answer. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I learned a lot. Like I said in the beginning, I wish I would have had some of these techniques early on as I was fighting my way through trying to get new things out into the market. But and for the audience, thank you for joining us today. If we didn't get to your question, Tim will send you a message following the webinar. We'll also send you notes from today's presentation, including any resources we might have referenced. We look forward to seeing you next month, where we'll continue our webinar series, Preparing Your Organization for Unprecedented Budget Uncertainty. This is going to be a really good one, where we'll do an interview style to explore best practices to prepare for federal budget uncertainty and shifts in geopolitical strategies. So we'll see you on August 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you very much. Have a great day.